All right, I think we are live. Hey, everybody. Thanks for
Hey,
watching
hey.
another episode of Vintage House. I'm really excited. I'm always excited, but tonight I'm especially excited because we have Dr. Malcolm. I'm sorry, I'm about to say Malcolm. That is not your name. I'm combining your names. Micah Salkind in the house. Thank you so much for being here. I mean, I've been wanting to do this for at least a year, if not longer. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a
Absolutely.
pleasure.
Let me do a little bit of intro because I think it's important for people to know who you are. So, and I'm going to say Dr. Micah Salkind, although you don't go by Dr. Micah.
I'll take it. I'll take
Do you
it.
take it? You earned it.
I did. It was a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, shoot. But Micah is a special project manager. He's still doing that for the city of
Hmm.
Providence
Yeah.
and the Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism. And adjunct assistant professor. You got any promotions since this was written? Or
No, still hanging in there.
of Humanities in the Department of American Studies at Brown University. Well, congrats on all of that good stuff. And doing really important work with Chicago's Honey Pot Performance. I know you're on a bunch of boards, working with Dr. Maida over there. And the Black Cultural Social Mapping Project. There's I don't know how much time you have, but you seem to be getting a lot done. You are a DJ, a sound designer, curator, and most importantly, the topic for tonight is the author of Do You Remember House? Hey,
Yes.
that doesn't even make it backwards. That's pretty cool.
I know. That is cool.
Yeah. So listen, this is such, I don't know if I would call it a labor of love. I think it was a labor of love.
Oh,
I'm,
definitely.
I'm guessing this is not like New York Times, like get, $1 million advance for it. But
No,
so much work
I'm
went
still
into
paying for that book. I haven't
it.
made a
Okay.
penny off of that yet,
We
but it
got
was
we got to
worth
start
it.
a GoFundMe camp
No,
campaign
no.
for it.
It's a long game, right? So it's, hopefully people will still be thinking about this stuff and using the book and building off of it in 20 years
Yeah.
from now.
Well, I hope so too. I mean, I think that's going to be really important. I see Lauren has joined us again. Lauren, can I add you to the stream?
Please add me to the
Okay.
stream. Yes, that would be great.
So listen, I know you had something to say to Micah before we get started. Lauren is a big fan of yours. And when we saw the book, we were just like, when we were reading the book, we were in the process of like, well, I should say we still are in the process of collecting these stories to do something very similar. And we're working with E Smooth, and you guys know E. And when this came out, I'm like, yeah, I got to check out Micah's book because he's doing exactly what we wanted to do. Maybe we don't need to write it. Do you think we
No,
still need to write books?
I think that this is a comma in a conversation, and whatever you all are doing is just as important and needs to come next because, if you think about hip hop, there's 100 books about hip hop at least, and we need 100 books about house music to get at all its complexity and all the different stories that need to be shared because it is such an amazingly nuanced art form with so many different incredible stories to be told.
So you said there could be 100 books. When you were doing your research, and I know you were working on this a long time, I would love for you to just tell people about kind of your motivation to do this. Like what let's just start with the genesis of the idea. Like where did that come from? Where were you in your life? And let's hear a little bit about the nugget of inspiration.
Sure. So I actually started my PhD program thinking that I would write about the history of Black theater in the 60s in New York City and beyond, because that was something I knew a little bit about as well and was interested in. But
a comma. Sorry about that. That was me. A little delay there. Go ahead.
So my advisor, my thesis advisor, Dr. Tricia Rose, who was pretty well known for her book Black Noise, which is an academic monograph about hip hop that was very early. It was written, I think, in 1994, so it was kind of early on the hip hop studies scholarship. And then she wrote several other books about hip hop later. I wrote a seminar paper for her about house music, and she sort of realized that I had a deep, deep love and passion for house, and really that started when I was a teenager going to raves in Kansas, outside of Kansas City, and in downtown Kansas City. So I knew about Chicago music from that originally, and then I had started partying when I was in my early 20s in New York, going to body and soul parties, going to later Shelter and other kind of really important house spaces, and fell in love with the culture. And so I think she really rightly pointed me in the direction of, you're going to spend 8 years working on this project. You don't want to be writing about something you just have an interest in. You want to be writing about something that you have a passion for. Mm-hmm. And that'll keep you in the game, but also it'll, it forced me I had to really hold myself accountable to, I need to tell this story in a way that respects and really ethically upholds the kind of commitments that all these people I'm writing about have to this culture. So I think it was a good decision in a lot of ways. And am I the only person that should be writing about house? No. Am I the only person that could have written this kind of book? No. But it was the right time, the right place, with like the right kind of support that I needed to do it. And I'll say that Maida was a huge piece of me thinking that this was a viable project, because she, at the time, in 2008, 2009, when I was starting this research, Maida was a postdoc at Brown in theater arts and performance studies. And I met her through a colleague of mine at an organization that I worked at before grad school called the Providence Black Repertory Company. And we ended up working on a project together that she was developing with some students. And she just was very encouraging about, we need to do more research about house and really think about this in complex ways. And she was the one who brought me to the Chosen Few picnic for the first time and said, you got to come see this.
That'll do it.
That was really, for me, a turning point of realizing that, like, the story of house in Chicago is not a footnote. It is its own thing, and because I had originally been like, well, I think it's really important that somebody tells the story of why this music got, why the use of tape recording and all this technology stuff helps make this less legible as Black music for people in Europe. But if you're going to tell that story, which is a story, and you haven't told the story of how it became so critically important for people in Chicago, it felt like a missed opportunity. And so I would really have to thank Maida for helping orient me towards all the beauty that is Chicago culture in this project. Does that sort of make sense of it? Like how I got into this?
It's really remarkable. I mean, it honestly, when I talked to you about it and I saw the direction that you were going in, I'm like, this is something that is like better than I could have ever imagined, because it was so much of it that was just sort of lost in translation. The years went on. And I think, it hadn't been done this way. And so I just appreciate you doing it. And I know how much blood, sweat, and tears went into it. And it tells a story that it's just not been told.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And I hope that that's true for all the people who helped sail this ship, because, there's like 60 interviews, long 2 to 3 hour interviews that I did with people to help ground this research, because there really, there wasn't a lot of, there are archives, right? There are stories, there are amazing books like Jesse Saunders' book, like Leonard Remix Roy's book, firsthand accounts. But then when you're taking that step of trying to look at all those stories of people that people told from their firsthand experiences and try to make sense of why it all mattered in a political context, in a bigger cultural, social context, that felt like work that I could do and that was useful. So I'm glad that it feels that way to those of you who lived that history.
Absolutely. Lauren, I know you had some questions for Micah.
Well, Micah, again, what a great, can you all hear me fine? I'm just making sure.
Absolutely.
So this is a phenomenal book. Clearly well-researched. You've got a bibliography of 100 books or so, certainly 50 articles, discography, interviews. It's just amazing. How long did it take you to write this book from the inception to publishing?
So I think it took, because I published it really in 2019, and I think I started doing the research and writing in 2010. So almost 9 years, because part of that publishing process is you've got everything in and they're just churning it out. But it took 9 years to get it done. And
Wow,
out in the world.
9 years.
8 years of actually doing the kind of editing and research and stuff. So that's a long time to be living with a project. But I'll tell you, remarkably, I never got sick of it. I'm not sick of it now. It's still endlessly fascinating to me. And Lori, I was telling you, I'm doing this little kind of project that was like a hanging Chad from the book project, where I had this archive that I learned about from, I don't know if you know Zinzi Powell, who used to own Zeaberry down in Hyde Park.
Mm-hmm.
But Zinzi was one of my interviewees, and she said in our interview, I had my cousin Robert Ford had this magazine called Thing Magazine.
Of course, I know Robert.
And
I have so many stories.
Right. So Robert was this incredible figure in the kind of early 90s, late 80s Black queer world in Chicago. And he published this incredible zine, which really was a magazine. It was it started out as kind of a self-published thing, but became really sophisticated, called Thing. And I had the chance to go to the Chicago History Museum and look at the entire archive they have there of Thing magazine, but I never got to write about it in the book. So now I've just recently had a chance to really think more about that work that Robert was doing with Trent Adkins and some of the other folks who were working on that project. And so to answer your question, Lauren, it took 8 years, but I feel like I'm still living with it and the Chicago Black Social Culture Map is an extension of this work. That started in 2014 with me working with Honeypot Performance at High Concept Laboratories, where they were in residence. So it's really great to not have to leave it. The book is just one piece of it.
There's so much work to be done, is really what the sort of the end game is that there's so many facets to this music and the history of this music and the archives of this music form that really need to be unpacked and then certainly told in unique ways. So no matter what those ways are, documentary, film, art, however those things are to be, brought to the world. So I'm really also very interested. You've interviewed a lot of people. You've talked to a lot of people. Talk to me about some of the stories of these phenomenal pioneers, whose story, besides the story like Frankie, we all know that Frankie needed a story, right? We all know that Ron Hardy needs its own book. But some of the other people who you've interviewed, who do you think might, and we've lost a lot of people too who are still not going to write there. Craig Cannon was writing a book. All the Craigs were writing a book. Everyone says they're writing a book and we let things happen and it doesn't happen. Think about, some of those unique stories that are in this book, or people you've talked to that you're only able to mention a little bit. Who has a story all to themselves who you think really we should encourage to write? Or some of those people? Give me a few.
Well, Craig Cannon is a great example of someone, because some of it also is who, because some of these elders really have these minds that hold the stories and they can tell stories. And that's such a beautiful part of that, right? Of being able to bear witness to someone. I just remember Craig Cannon talking about being a young kid and sitting, on a high stool with the turntable while his parents would party and figuring out how to do the changes in the music so that they would stay on the dance floor. So those kinds of moments, they come from the storyteller. And so I would say Craig, I think Michael Ezebukwu, I think Dana Powell has amazing stories, and Craig Loftus, especially some of those older gay Black men who were in the orbit of Frankie, who in some ways are, Frankie's star is so luminous that a lot of the people that helped build his, the worlds of the power plant and the warehouse, they have their own incredible stories and their other residencies and all that, there's just so much there. I also think some of the women DJs who were real pioneers, like Celeste Alexander. Oh my God, what an amazing woman, and a great storyteller as well. And of course, Lori has incredible stories, and I think that there's probably a couple books in Lori as well. So whether you've got the energy to spend 8 years on it, or if you want to do a film or whatever, how you get those stories into the world. I loved talking to Terry Bristol and Valerie Psycho Bitch Scheinflug. I think they're so incredible, and Darlene Lady D Jackson is just such a light. And so all these people, so there's so many folks in Chicago who have lived extraordinary lives, are living extraordinary lives. And it's such a gift to be able to just have that intimate moment of bearing witness to those stories with them. And, now those live with the Center for Black Music Research. So if other people want to listen to what I did, that's great. But I think there's so many more stories to be told. I would love to know about some of the worlds of, Kashmir and the kind of generation from the 90s that built. I always wanted to interview Derek Carter. He wouldn't do it. I don't know whether he's shy or.
Why wouldn't he do it?
I don't know. He didn't want to, wasn't feeling up to it. Some people, I think also, I don't know if this is Derek's situation, but there's a kind of you make yourself vulnerable when you tell your story, and you also run the risk of saying something that later you might regret. So there's risks involved, especially with a scholar who's going to interpret your words, and they may not say the piece what you said that you wanted them to. I always tried to really give people the benefit of the doubt, and if they said something that could have been framed in a way that was less than flattering to someone else, that's not important to air that piece of it, right? More interesting to me is like, where were the places where they were lifting other people up, or connecting, or building a sense of community or collectivity. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, Lauren. There's a lot of stories.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. There's so many stories still yet that need to be unpacked, certainly as we try to build a canon of work for this field of scholarship. I want someone to write the book about Jeffrey Pub. Who's going to write that book? Who's around who's going to write that book for us?
That's a great point. Yeah, and I never went to Jeffrey Pub. It was a venue that I knew how important it was and is, right? Like Jeffrey Pub is still operational today. Am I right?
There.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that there should be a book that's just about Jeffrey Pub. That's just,
exactly. There's
years.
So many books that need to be written about this, so that we can bring this, as a field of study that is international, which it should be, in a different way, very much like hip hop. And, how do we do that? How do we make this book and your book and other books, sort of a part of, a real sort of, just a stream of scholarship? What else needs to, what else is missing from that? Clearly you covered a lot. You had to cover a lot to create this story. But what else is missing from that canon? What else can we encourage other people to be writing about, besides sort of clubs that have been around 50 years, clubs that came people? What else should we be talking about?
Something that I really give short shrift to, in part because I'm ill-equipped to, I'm not the one to do it, is to talk about the dance, right? Like the amazing dance culture that's part of social dance spaces in Chicago, right? Like from steppers to juke and footwork, and to all the ways that house dance, which is a global phenomenon now, has its roots in Chicago, and also New York, right? Like those Chicago, New York, Detroit, often these artistic forms are incubated in all those spaces in different ways at different times. But I think that there could be a book just about dancers and how dancers have built these worlds together in the city. And I couldn't tell you how to write it, but I think one of the things that you all can do and that I try to do is elevate. Whenever I see someone else doing the work, to try to amp them up and to say, like, I see, you, April Graham, who was a young scholar that was working as on a geography project in Chicago and is now out at Berkeley doing her PhD. And I would be shocked if she doesn't find some way to talk about house music culture and the history of house in Chicago. But, just to be like, yes, I see you, and what you're doing is important. And there's a body of scholarship, and there's a legacy, and you're a part of something, which I felt so lucky to be included with all of you, the intellectuals of Chicago house that are holding these traditions alive and supporting research and scholarship and showing people that you don't have to have a PhD to do it. It's something
Just
that anyone can be a part of. Just do it. Yeah, just be a part of it. And public scholarship is be a part of an exhibition, be a part of a oral history project. You never know who's going to build off that work.
Exactly. That's so, to me, important. Where's Boogie McLaren in this whole book writing thing? With her background, there's another gentleman who went to Northwestern who went specifically to Old Town School to study under her, right?
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to just study with Boogie. And she's one of those people who really should be writing things. I think she's sort of always, I love Boogie, but, she's here, she's there. But how do we, the encouragement of some of these people like Lori Branch to, really get this, just start it even small and put that work out into the world. How do you encourage someone like Boogie to do that? I know you worked extensively with her. Thank you. I see my name is in the book. I appreciate you putting my name in there somewhere with Boogie as well. So I appreciate you doing. But how do you encourage someone like Boogie or some of these other people who are not going to get these PhDs, who are not required to write? How do we get them to think about writing something like that?
Yeah. I think it's a good question because some people just writing is not their medium, and they work in other ways. They tell their stories in other ways, right? And especially for dancers,
they just want to dance, right?
They just want to dance, yeah. And it's like if you're writing about it and you're talking to people about it and you're analyzing it in some way, you're not doing it and living it.
Right.
But I think there'll be a time for everyone when they are ready to do that. It's with someone who's a genius like Boogie, like I feel like it's not if, it's when she's ready to do that, she'll do it, or she'll work with someone who she feels comfortable with doing that. I learned a lot from her. Both, she was generous enough to let me take her class for a couple months when I was in Chicago, and wow, like that's like a way of learning about Chicago house culture and history that you can't. There's no other way to learn that than from someone who's that kind of genius. But ultimately, she wasn't comfortable with me writing about her work in that kind of academic tone in the way that I was trying to do my project. And I think I was a better scholar for not trying to force her to do that. And she held me accountable to that. So that, that didn't make it in. And I think it was the right choice for her and for me. And, but I hope someday that she's able to preserve what she does in a way that feels authentic to her. And I think other people, the same thing. Like, if, Derek doesn't want me to interview him, I hope he writes his own stories and narrates that history in a way that's authentic to him. And, at the end of the day, like when you're a public figure like a DJ, you can't stop me from going, well, you could stop me, I guess, from going to hear your sets and writing about how it makes me feel. But, that's a different level of engagement than me understanding where your art comes from on a personal level and hearing you tell the story of how you got to that place where you could rock a dance floor like that,
That's a good place too. I like that angle to a certain degree because again, will we be able to, pin down some of these people? And I always feel like there's someone, I always feel like my job is to encourage. I'm all about sort of Black scholarship, making sure that Black art is preserved, Black people's histories are preserved as well. So however I can encourage people to do that in whatever that way is, whether again, it's with an archive or whatever, but sometimes it is sort of just being around those people, gaining some of that confidence, say, look, you're not going to write this story yourself. I'm going to write this story, whether you like it or not, so you might as well join in on this thing. Maybe that's just a different way of talking to people, but
yeah, well, and it depends on your relationship. Yeah.
like it's a tough one to do, but it's like, if, sometimes I feel like if I try to encourage people and you say, look, somebody's going to make this happen. And, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. So you might as well just go ahead and do it. So you have to maybe threaten people. I don't know if that's the right word.
I think just,
I had a question. Michael, do you feel like are you guys hearing the echo? It's just me. Do you feel like folks who didn't take you up on the offer have regrets?
no one ever said anything to me like that. I mean, I think there are people from the project that I'm closer to than others. And, I sent the book to everyone who was an interviewee. So people have it, and they, I've heard from different people of, oh, I wish we had done this in a different way. Or, I've heard some regrets from some people, or I wish I had been featured more prominently because I think I'm the shit, and, why don't you? But no one ever said like, well, why didn't you interview me? Because really with the interviewing, if somebody told me to interview you, I called you and tried. With like Rocky Jones, I tried for a couple weeks, and when it got, at some point it was clear that it wasn't going to happen, and I just sort of gave up. But I also realized with someone like that their story was already out there in a lot of ways, and they were certainly writing their own story. Whereas with someone like Mike Winston, I was like a little more persistent maybe, or, someone like Dana, I'm going to drive to Gary, Indiana to interview you because I think you're fabulous and I don't want to miss this. So I think maybe some people felt that way, but it was also just, I think I try to make this clear in the book that sample is just a sample. It's not everybody. It's not the most important people. There are some people in that group who were they came to a talk I did and they said, I went to Kaboom in my youth, so let's talk. And I said, let's talk. So, that it wasn't, it was the true definition of snowball sampling of just, all right, you want to go? I'll meet you.
Everyone's story is credible and important to, again, the movement and the shape of how house music is turned out, over time. So I think all those people have sort of great stories. So I'm always, sort of curious about the, sort of archiving, the artifacts, the oral histories. And again, this might be taking too much of a scholarly sort of view of sort of this work or talking to you, but your work, I know you have copies of your own work, but the work was stored and housed at CBMR. And right now, CBMR is just sort of is defunct, and it's not defunct, but it's sort of not being active. It's not activated right there with space. They're not moving forward. It's now simply a collection inside of this archive. And to me, one of the things that is critical about preserving Black history is preserving those artifacts. We weren't taught to do that. It was not made to be important to us in any way over the last 400 years, certainly. And if we don't prove where we are, if you're using these types of tools, people, again, will write you out, which is why books are important. But now this is not active. I know we're attempting to activate it at the, with the Chicago Black Social Culture Map. Did they talk to you? Did anyone tell you, you've stored this work, you've done work with CBMR, Columbia College. This is now not going to be an active archive. Did anyone contact you, or how do you then maneuver to help them move this to something that is more active so people are using it, people are involved in it, Chicago knows it's there? How did you find out that they were going under?
It sort of became clear to me that something was up in the year after I was finished with the research, when there just were fewer and fewer resources, when the brilliant Monica Hairston O'Connell left. So I worked with CBMR because I never thought this would happen, right? I thought Sam Floyd established this archive. It's just solid. They're going to be there. They're part of an academic institution. Their focus is music. This should be secure. But I also knew nothing, is secure, especially when it comes to digital repositories, right? That's, you got to back up and back up and back up one more time. So
Right.
I think I am not opposed to, Charles and I talked about, well, could this be something that lives with the MDMA archive, the archive, the modern dance music archive that y'all were working on? And at the time I was like, well, I just made these relationships with CBMR and my interviewees. I kind of want to like see how this plays out. But that, I think at some point, the most important thing is that this stuff is accessible to people, right? So finding a way to make it accessible. And so we should continue talking about that, Lauren, of like, how do we make sure that this doesn't just get locked into a defunct archive that may or may not find its groove again anytime soon.
Hey, I want to just do a little commercial break. I'm sorry if I'm a little distracted. I've been trying to get the comments up here because they're on my page, and for some reason StreamYard is like blocking it, and there's a way to unblock it. So I'm going to ask you guys who are watching. Many of you, Vince, I know you're Reggie Davenport, Lion. I mean, you still great. Victoria. So many of you guys have comments. I'm going to ask you a favor. If you go to the Vintage House page, hopefully then your comments will show here, and then we can have a conversation about your comments. I could read some of those now, but Preston Shanks, for example, was saying that clubs were a safe haven from negativity and promoters of self-identification. So KKC was important. There's a lot of Celeste Alexander just gave you a big shout out. So I think there are a lot of folks watching, but if you wouldn't mind switching over to the Vintage House page, then I can actually see your comments and we can bring you on into the conversation in a better way. So sorry for that interruption.
That's a great interruption, by the way. So
kind of fix it. So go ahead.
Celeste and some of the other DJs, we're happy to talk to you about this work. How did you find sort of Chicago and sort of that community? To me, you can see that they're super welcoming. Did you find that? Was that a surprise to you?
Not a surprise. I mean, it's in the music, right? Like the music just, it invites you in. It's that there's no, for me, disconnect between the hospitality of Chicagoans and their joy at sharing their culture, and also the reason that people all over the world have, glommed onto that culture, and in some ways, to a degree that it's like they've taken it and they've forgotten who brought it to them. But I think that, no one was from the experience of being backstage at Chosen Few and getting to help Jesse and Alan and those guys produce that festival. I wouldn't say produce, but definitely like run around backstage and help get things going one year, and just being included in that way. What's up, Reggie? To all the way to like meeting with people like Robert Williams, who is, such an important figure, so humble, so generous with his time, so incredibly good at telling the stories. So I never felt like there were people that didn't want to talk, but the people who did want to talk always were so warm and welcoming and generous with their time and stories. So you can never repay that kind of hospitality. It's like, it's just incredible.
It was. I mean, I have to say, when I look at the book and I go through the index, I think the index is just as fascinating as the actual book, because it's just such a breadth. Like everything that is covered in here, from the DJs to the producers to the dancers to the music to the actual records that people talked about. I mean, it's so incredibly rich. And I would have to I dare anybody to tell me that there's something on the history of Chicago house music. I think Jesse has done an amazing job recently capturing like individual stories. But Leonard Remix Roy. I mean, there's been a few others, but sort of the I don't know, the comprehensive nature of kind of the timeline, the social map, sort of everything that's included in there. I just don't think there's anything like it. And I hope that it gets a lot more traction, because there are many stories that need to be told. A lot, and we're talking about Jesse's book all month because people are hearing voices. Their voices are being heard. I'm hearing voices, but so much more. So Celeste is saying that it's an awesome book. Celeste, you're an awesome DJ. You're one of my inspirations, as well as so many other people. Lady D, what's up? She was just on the show. Hey, Micah, the book is truth. And it brought me and Lady D together. So, I can't be upset about that. That's when we really, became friends at your thing.
That's awesome. No, that's always like such a joy to be able to bring some of the people who give you life together to make their own bonds or reinforce their own bonds.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. One of the cool things too that I learned through the process was just how deeply y'all were into the punk thing. And how radical that is when you think about the way that popular music histories have been written about punk, right?
Yes.
That it's not Black, that it's not gay, that it's this very white heteromasculine thing. But here it's happening, in Chicago, where Italo disco and punk records are getting mixed in with these brand new, forward thinking, revolutionary tracks that people are producing. And then the disco classics that they're figuring out how to keep alive forever and ever. I heard today a brand new remix of Mainline, and I'm like, you'd think that people would be done, but
they're not.
They're not.
I know. I mean, listen, and they're not only done, but they're new for some folks. I mean, there are people who are younger folks and in and out of Chicago and other countries who I think I played somebody's remix of "Is It All Over My Face," and they were like, "What is that song?" And I was like, "Oldest songs known to mankind in the history of house music." But it was Titan's remix, and people were like, "What? Where?" I'm like, "Dude, catch up. It's good."
Right. That's why they're the classics.
This book references, and I don't know you as anything other than a scholar, but this thing says that you're a DJ. You're a DJ and a sound designer and a curator of performance. Talk to me about your DJ background.
So I started DJing in my bedroom when I was a teenager, when I was 17, and exactly Rock Lobster forever.
Hey, Melody.
But I started DJing semi-professionally, which is to say, not to make my daily bread, but because I loved it and because it was important to me. In about 2007, so my collaborator Jackson Morley and we grew up together in Lawrence, Kansas, and then he moved out here to Providence in 2006, and we started throwing parties here at bars and in an art gallery. We did a monthly event that was very popular. And then really when I went to Chicago to do my research, I stopped DJing because I really felt like I had nothing left to say. I was ready to listen. And that was a really big shift in consciousness to because, if you, Laura, this, if you've got that mentality as a DJ, you're always looking for that next great track you want to play. You're always what can I say? Or how am I going to say it? Right. And it felt really fun to go to Chicago and just be like, I'm going to go out 3 or 4 times a week, just listen to other DJs and not worry about what I'm going to say and just soak it in. And just this past year, I started throwing a new party in Providence. And then, of course, it's we're about to do the third one. And then it's COVID shutdown,
Oh, man, it just ruined everything.
Oh, but we'll get going again when we can.
Yes, Vince Mac, we love the remixes of the classics. I like remixes of the remixes of the classics. There's so many ways that you could go with it, and it don't have to be classics. I mean, stuff is remixes are just great, and I love playing them. Hey, I have a couple questions for you. I want to know what surprised you? The melding or the integration of punk as one of these influencers in house music surprised you, and that it was not just sort of relegated to, Sid Vicious and what we think of when we think of punk music, that it was really like young Black kids, going across the city, scouring through records and finding punk and having some affinity with that. What else surprised you when you were talking to people? I mean, I would guess you had some preconceived ideas about what you would discover. Like, what was like a big shocking moment when you were talking, and who shocked you the most?
That's a good question. Well, I think part of the experience of doing oral history for me is that the revelation is very long. It's a long, stretched out thing, right? So you start learning these bits and pieces of the story and start putting things together over months and months and months. So rarely do you have that moment of like a bombshell lands in your lap where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. But there were moments like when I realized that there were trans and gender nonconforming folks in blues clubs in the 70s that were like, straight clubs, quote unquote, but that was a part of normal popular music culture on the South Side. I was like, that's incredible. And that's a story you don't hear. People like Hi-Fi White, these characters in this story of Chicago music that's longer than house, right? This thing that I think I try to do in the book to really connect house to this legacy of musical culture that's over a century before, basically Great Migration on, if not earlier, in a lot of ways. So those moments of seeing queer people in the archive, when you're so often just unaware, right? Because they're covered over, or they're made invisible, or they're just forgotten. That those moments were really amazing. I was also surprised, and Lori, maybe you can speak to this a little, but just that people didn't really want to talk about AIDS and the AIDS crisis. And it
why not?
I think it made sense because I think it's painful for people.
Yeah, it is. It is. I will say this, Micah, that it wasn't until Jesse asked me to talk about my story for his book that I realized I was suppressing some of that, and just by bringing it up, and listen, I do that. I talk about AIDS as a career. I mean, that's what I do. But when you connect it to the house music scene, it is a painful part of our history that often we kind of just sort of, we kind of move past it. We forget that, Robert Ford had AIDS, that so many people were HIV positive and got taken out of the game, and how much did we lose? How much did we lose from that? And I do want to spend a little bit of time talking. I don't want you to lose your point.
No, that is the point.
The thing that happened with Jesse was that I realized that I stepped away from the music scene. I mean, partially because I was like trying to finish college, and you can't party 5 nights a week and DJ 3 nights a week and think you're going to finish something other than that. That's your life,
That's a job.
That was a job, and it wasn't paying enough, and I needed to really actually focus on something else. So I kind of stepped away for a few years, like in the late 80s, well, sort of mid to late 80s, like 80s, 85, 86. I forget the last party I did, but it was somewhere around 85, 86 until about 90, 91. And I did a little production work in between there. But part of it was because it was where I was seeing so much death and disease and destruction and fear. And my friend groups were like getting sick. And it was too much closely connected to the music. And I felt like I wanted to like go to school and not think about that. And I think that I'm not the only one who had that story. Because there's a few people who disappeared and sort of came back after things were a little easier.
Yeah, and I felt like this book couldn't tell all those stories. There should there could be a book just about house music, culture, and AIDS and HIV, and that would be a book in and of itself. And so I always just sort of let people tell the stories. That's sort of my philosophy behind what's an oral history and not just a regular kind of journalistic interview. It's you let people tell you what's important to them, but the absence was telling too. And I think that that's really helpful for me to understand sort of where you were with that, because it helps put that in context a little bit.
So,
life a little
ahead.
bit. I think, Jose Escavera, the dancer, who wrote a book and also that became a play, discussed in a lot of detail how sort of that story around his dance crew days, AIDS was wiping out good friends. Parents were, again, just not supporting their children at all because they weren't supportive of the lifestyle. And so when they were dying from AIDS, they didn't get a lot of help or a lot of sympathy. In the play, he talked about this gentleman named Jesse Velez, which is in the book of the Pluggers. And in that is one of this guy's sort of tributes around the AIDS crisis and how all the people from the different stations, the different clubs came to support him, but his own family didn't come to support him in around that time frame. And I think you're right. There's an entire book or more plays or something that really should highlight that story. And at some point, I do want to talk to you all. I think Lori tries to give us sort of, I think, the gay point of view to this music a lot. And I think some of us don't think about that part as much as we should. Because
Lauren,
of course,
why do you think we should?
Well, because first of all, it's important. Clearly, we've all pointed out that if Robert Williams had anything to do with the birth of this music, even though, and if Craig Cannon said it was him who did some things, guess what? Both of those two great gentlemen are gay, right? And so certainly we have to talk about it in that context. But I do think, some of the other people like myself, who didn't really realize we were just enjoying the music by the time it came around. So we didn't really think about the gay aspect of that. I mean, I think when you talk about that, there's gays in blues, there's gays in gospel music. Again, there's gospel choirs all over the world. Where we just ignored the fact that Daryl Pandy was gay. You know what I mean? Like we just weren't going to think about it. We're just enjoying the music and that kind of thing. So we don't really address it in that way. And I think some people.
And what would addressing it look like? Because I think that we've had this debate for a while, and Miko said that it was crazy. We saw our friends dying on the scene, but we kept running back to the music box because it connected us and made us love each other. We were getting hugs. Yeah, I mean, I think there was some of that. Celeste says that it was double fold because, people who weren't lost to HIV were lost to the drug. There was a lot going on. Celeste, Miko, there was a lot going on. But I want to say, homophobia is real. And because we belong to this loving community doesn't mean that it just disappears. I think it is a lot like the gay man in the church who is accepted. He's paying tithes. He might be leading choir. He might be doing all that. But there is an unspoken rule that you don't talk about it. And if you do, then we got to deal with you.
Right, exactly.
And if we got to deal with you, then this may not be a friendly place for you. So it's that kind of second-class citizenship that even takes place in the house community. Am I off here, Micah? In your research, what did you find?
Well, I focused on the work of gay people because that's what was, that for me was what was lacking in the archive of music journalism, is that you had almost no gay voices. And, you would always hear like, that's the origin. But it's not just the origin, it's the past, present, and the future of house music. There's always going to be gay people involved. It comes out of a specific gay Black experience, So I think what you're both saying is really interesting, because I do think, as Lauren points out, a lot of people that gay energy was secondary to their experience of it, and so much of the way that they understood and have wanted to narrate and remember the history is about them and their own world. And so I think one of the things we can do by celebrating the gay history of house is to embrace gay people and say, you're part of who we are. And, and we're not scared to embrace you because we're comfortable with who we are. It's
Mhm.
it's what's so beautiful right now about the young people who are building the movement, the uprisings around our country, the Black Lives Matters movement. It's all about centering queer and trans people. That's like a huge piece of it, and that inclusivity makes it so strong. So I think that we only have the chance to be stronger if we are more inclusive with this music culture. But at the same time, people have their own experiences, and that's what they know.
Absolutely.
So.
And so much of that is internalized. It's internalized homophobia. I mean, I know a lot of gay people who still aren't out. It's like 2020, and they're like, yeah, the people who know me know. And if someone asks me, I'll tell them. And it's like, damn, I just feel like, damn, we still there? Like, really? Like you are like an iconic figure. You deserve better than that.
I consider this a very similar argument to the Black Lives Matter and sort of internal and sort of racism that exists in the world. If you don't talk about it, it's almost like the gay guy at the church, right? You're not going to talk about it. You're just going to ignore that. It's just like racism. It's there. Black people get killed every day. Black people discriminate every day. Europeans are just not going to deal with it. We're not going to center. We're not going to talk about it, and we're just going to let it move past. So I think that's why I think it's important that we all talk about these different things. So much pain involved in all of those things oftentimes shows up in that music, even though it's about love and it's upbeat. That pain shows up in most Black music, from blues to gospel to whatever. And it shows up certainly in house music because people are attempting to be their true selves in these environments. Sometimes it comes out in different ways, but we have to address it. And I think even people, I think about, some people who don't want to mention that in their stories often. It's time to unpack that. It's also time to unpack that drug culture and the people we lost, around that. I think we've done that a little bit.
Not as much.
Yeah, but we need to talk about that drug culture and the people we lost to it, and what was happening. Was it a lot of people I know who were gay were doing a lot of drugs, sort of internalizing some of these feelings and allowing the drug culture to take them over. I don't know if we talk about that a lot in stories or in panel discussions. I think it comes out when we have a discussion. So someone like Celeste will tell us about their lives, and someone like Mike Winston will tell them about our lives. But are we talking about that sort of as a culture, as a house music culture, like all those other people who were affected and didn't make it to tell their stories today?
Yeah. So you mentioned Celeste, so I'm putting up her comment. It seems that music superseded all division. It was a unifying factor. That's what made it so magical. It saved us all. Music made the pain go away, if only for a moment of the time we spent on the dance floor. So I agree with you, Celeste. I think the music made the pain go away. Where my frustration was, being someone who came out, and that wasn't easy for me in 1980, to sort of be who I felt like I was. Probably easier for me as a woman than it was as a woman and as a female DJ, as a semi-female DJ, versus a dude. I can appreciate why my friends didn't want to come out, because the world's not as kind to men who come out. So what's the point, Lori? I forgot that. So the music was a unifying factor. Why wasn't it unifying enough for people to feel comfortable to come out, even in a gay-infused environment? Like, what gets in the way of that?
I wonder, Lori, if the music had stayed underground, if it would have just stayed a lot gayer, and that there would have been more safety there. Because I think some of what happens when things become mainstream is that the industry has a huge impact on how people feel like they can present themselves. So when you think about, how could anybody miss that Daryl Pandy in the video for, Love Can't Turn Around, is a gay man, but it's not part of the press kit, right? It's not when the group goes on the press junket, no one's trying to celebrate that. And that those cues aren't lost on younger people who are coming up and trying to make a name.
Okay. Well, Vince doesn't think he doesn't think there was a division, and I agree with you, Vince. on that point is that there wasn't like an outward division. That if you were sort of part of that early house music scene, you didn't necessarily feel like there was a division. What I'm saying is that I knew that there were people who were still pained by their either gender identity, their sexual orientation, and were living these very sort of existences because of it, even in our community. And that's like what Lauren was said. I think a lot of the ills, such as, substance use and abuse, grew out of that. I don't know. Ron Hardy. Let's talk about Ron Hardy.
Yeah, I'm like the Vince guy. I'm like, oh, was there a division where people, I'm just dancing. I'm just having the best time ever. I didn't realize there were divisions and issues and things like that. But, in hindsight and certainly learning more, you realize that maybe there's more than you thought, that people weren't as comfortable with other people as you thought they were.
There was, and especially with trans folks, there's a big long echo. I'm just going to mute somebody. People will talk about it. Like they felt like some of these trans women were messy. They didn't want them to come in the clubs. We've had these panel discussions. You've been a part of those, Lauren. So there was a lot of transphobia. There were issues. There were issues that would, and it's the world, so there's going to be issues. It's just in this place, you would expect that wouldn't occur.
And I think that to your point about needing to say explicitly, like, this is what we believe. This community isn't homophobic. This community is built on the shoulders of queer, Black, and, queer and trans Black folks. And so they're always going to be here. And like, if you're not into that, maybe this isn't for you. And then all of a sudden it kind of becomes a safer space over time, perhaps. And I think, that's true for a lot of spaces in Chicago where you all have built these worlds that are, as you said, Lauren, apart from the everyday racism, homophobia, all the hate, all the stuff people want to escape when they're partying. So it's like, by actually saying that this is what it is and not shying away from, and not saying that you have to be this to be here, it sort of helps everyone feel like they're included or they're prioritized, or, they're not going to be discriminated against, if that makes sense.
One of my favorite Charles Matlock stories, hey Charles, if he's listening, is early on in his house music world. Once he discovered the warehouse and house music, didn't want to spend time in high school anymore, hanging out with kids. He wanted to hang out with adults. And he was introducing his friends to his music. He loved this music. And he had to tell his friends, like, look, if you've got a problem with gay people, then we don't need to see it right here. And I feel like that was to me, that shows you who that person is. And it shows you how I felt like as time went on, possibly, that house music people start to become like, if you want to enjoy this music, you need to embrace everybody. So don't even come in here with BS. You know what I mean? And I think, you hear other people's stories and they say, look, they came to the club, knew they were gay, but wasn't walking around talking about I'm gay. Just like, oh yeah, we all going to the club, that kind of thing. And this experience his own thing. But I think we started to sort of we started to create inclusive communities by, having this music. I'm surprised so where are you from again, Micah?
I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas.
What's the gay community in Kansas? The introduction of your book tells me a little bit, but I'd love for you to tell us the story of that, because Kansas is a blur to me. I can't.
Yeah. I think if you're in Kansas City, it's like any big city, and there's gay clubs and there's drag scene and there are all kinds of gay communities. But I think that, growing up in a college town like Lawrence, there was maybe one gay night, and I was trying to sneak in and I was trying to say it was because I liked the music, but clearly you want to be there because you want to be around people like you. But I didn't, I came out really as an adult living in Providence, and then spending time in places like Chicago and New York and San Francisco, where there's just such incredible, vibrant gay culture that's diverse, that there are Black institutions run by gay Black folks, that, you know, you can see these intergenerational queer communities. But that wasn't what I grew up around. So I had a good friend who worked with me, who was 6 years my elder, who was Black and gay, and he introduced me to house music and to raves. And so that was the kind of connection early on, and understanding that as being part of the root of the music. But yeah, I couldn't tell you what it's like to be a young gay person there now. I mean, got to be hard, but it has changed.
I mean, you won't tell me, because I can't say.
So listen, it's already been an hour. Can you believe it?
Time flies. You guys are the best promoters. I'm like, I need to put you on retainer.
No. We're going to do a GoFundMe campaign. You know what? So Micah's book, Do You Remember House, is really just an amazing tribute to Chicago, to the artists, to the dancers, to the scene, you know, that birthed this international movement. And, you know, there's just so many. Who was that?
Duchess Darlene, or Duchess. I'm going to say Darlene. Is it now? I'm wondering if I've got her name right, because I'm going to trip. But it's on the back. She's Darling Shear, the beautiful, incomparable Darling Shear.
Yes, but I just want to encourage everyone. You know, Micah, there's so many other questions that I have for you about this book, and I really want you to come back on so we can dive a little bit more deeply into some of the subject matter, especially. Yeah, it's rich, and I encourage you guys. Look, this is going to be a collector's item, just like Jesse's book. So go and get you one. Amazon. I bought, I think I gave them out as Christmas presents.
Oh, that's awesome.
Of course. And I have the hardcover for myself. You can get one of those. Yes, I did get one of those. But I Remember House is a song by Blaze featuring Palmer Brown. So shout out to Blaze and Palmer Brown for this really spectacular title. It's a great cover. It's a great book. I want to just ask you one question before we get out of here. What's next? What was sort of, let me ask you two questions. What was the moral of the story for you? So when you finished this whole project and you were like, here's what I know. I
think what I realized at the end, because I wrote the introduction at the very end of the book, I had already gotten read by a senior scholar in my field for my crappy introduction. And so I started over and really built it out. And what I realized is the book is about memory. It's about public memory. It's about how people make memory together in community. And what the big takeaway for me with house music culture is that to be in house music culture, you're in that debate about how it was, right? Like you all are all historians, and you're all telling your stories and figuring out how they fit together. And for me, that was the takeaway, is that house music culture is a culture of memory keepers and culture bearers who care deeply about the stories and want to share them. And so that's sort of like, it's sort of a cop-out in some ways, because maybe every culture is that on some level, but it was so deep and palpable that Chicagoans are involved in this daily struggle to get closer to the truth about what this stuff means.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so what next? What do you want to happen now?
I want young scholars. I want everyday people who don't think they're scholars. I want people who thought they were out of the game but got a book in them somehow, some way, like we were talking about. I want everyone to write their stories, because in 20 years, when somebody else is trying to write a book about house, I want them to have 100 sources that are rich and nuanced, and that whatever they say about house.
And focused on house. We have
the movie, Truth.
By using all these other tools.
We're doing the movie. We are doing the movie. That is happening. Okay.
There are so many stories. I think you could have, like, we got to get Lena Waite up in here to do the TV, the serial drama, Showtime forget, The Shy is great,
Yes.
but let's do like that story
Yes.
of house music culture.
I know. I had a fantasy once when I was younger that Jada Pinkett would play me. She's too old now because she would be Laurie Branch in the 1980 version.
Yes.
But
She's
now
stunning,
we need someone younger now.
no.
Celeste, who would play you? Reggie, that's the next question I have.
Casting call.
After this show, who would play you?
Yeah, fan cast in
Celeste.
the house music movie.
David Allen, who would play you in the house music movie? All right, we can have another conversation. But anyway, I want to say thank you all for watching. Micah, thank you so much for this piece
Thank
of
you
art,
both.
this piece of history. You are the bomb. We love you.
We're going to create more classes and more things so people can get it.
Love you, Celeste.
Hopefully you and Jesse together.
Yeah, tell people to put it on their syllabi.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And for everyone who's been on the chat, thank you for tuning in. And I would love to talk again with y'all. So let's, we're obviously in touch, but
we'll make it happen. I mean, we'll do another one of these. Let's give it a little time for it to sink in and figure out sort of how we come back at this. But we're going to have Micah back. And maybe what we'll do is similarly what Jesse did is maybe we'll have folks who are in the book, come on and talk to you about their experiences. So if you want to be on the show, you can pop in and pop out. We can talk about Reggie Davenport on page 103. I know you're there.
That's a great idea. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
All right. Big love to everyone. You guys stay safe. Lauren, you got something else to say, honey?
No, just thank you, Micah, so much. Thank you for your scholarship and your work here. Appreciate it. And the world will be saying your name in 100 years, hopefully.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate
All right.
it.
You guys have a great night, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
See you soon.
Peace.